Well, welcome to Let Us Reason Together, the Monday edition. I'm your host for today, Sandi Craig. John Craig is out. Sorry, guys. I know you love it when he's here, but today he is out and about working. But that's a good thing. Hallelujah for work. But you have me. Who am I? My husband and I, John, and I'm Sandi Craig. We pastor a congregation here in Amarillo, Texas, called Life of Worship. And we meet on Shabbat, of course, on Saturdays at 2 p.m. We have our Torah Portion, and it is live on Zoom. And you can always let us know that you want to join us, and we will bring you in and love to have you. And then we have our main service at 5 p.m. Central, and it is live on YouTube. You can go to Life of Worship Amarillo on YouTube or type in John and Sandi Craig Amarillo, whatever. You'll get to us, and you can watch the archives of our messages, our services, and join us live. Anyway, we already have Terry in our chat room. She is part of our congregation, and we love her. We haven't been able to see her in the last couple of weeks, but nevertheless, she is part of this family, as are you when you join us. Anyway, we do a few other things as well. We do Monday morning War Room prayers, which we just had. I hope you were able to join us for that. Not join us some other times. They're always at prayers, War Room prayers on this network are always at 7:30 a.m. Central Time. And everything I have is based on Central because I'm in Amarillo, Texas. Central. That's right. And then we also have this show on Mondays every week. And Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. we have Walking in Spirit and Truth. And then Thursdays, The Next Chapter. Mark and I are on that show together with a couple other people. Always a great show, good information, and we would love to have you for that too. So there are a few things that we do. Also, we have at Life of Worship, we have our Monday Torah Talk. Anyway, it's the 9. We're on Zoom too, if you ever want to join that. Anyway, nonetheless, we are glad that you've joined us here November 9th, 2020, the 22nd day of Heshvan in the Hebrew year 5781. It's a great day because Yah's made it. That's right. And what is today? Well, there are a few things this day. Is nothing super fun or silly or anything like that. It's World Freedom Day. Remember that. It's World Orphans Day. It's National Child Safety Day, and a couple other days, which I'm not even going to say them. I'm not even going there. But there's a few things that have happened on this day in history. Yeah, a fire destroyed about 800 buildings in Boston, Massachusetts in 1872. In 1911, George Claude of Paris, France, applied for a patent on neon advertising signs. If you have a business, you probably use that. Anyway, in 1918, Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm II announced he would abdicate, and he fled to the Netherlands. Yeah, there's a few things. In 1953, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld a 1922 ruling that Major League Baseball did not come within the scope of federal antitrust laws. Okay. And in 1961, the Professional Golfers Association, the PGA, eliminated its Caucasians only rule. That's a sad thing, isn't it? And in 1976, the UN General Assembly approved 10 resolutions condemning the apartheid government in South Africa. And in 1981, U.S. troops began arriving in Egypt for a 3-week rapid deployment free force exercise. Somalia, Sudan, and Oman were also involved in this operation. In 1989, Communist East Germany opened its borders, allowing its citizens to freely travel to the West. And in 1998, PBS aired its documentary special, Chihuly over Venice. I have no idea why that's important, but anyway, it happened in this day in history, along with a lot of other things. But just so you know that you are informed through your day, so you can go tell everybody, I'm not alone on this show. Hallelujah. So first, we have Mr. Mark David Smith, our leader. We want to bring him in because we have a special guest today that I want him to bring in for us. Mark, it is so good to see you up and around this morning, this Monday morning. Glad you're here.
Are you talked out, are you?
Well, I feel like I've been up for hours, but I do actually want to say I didn't get a phone call this morning. So if I get a phone call, it'll be short, but I will have to leave for if I get a phone call from Jonathan, I will have to leave just for a few minutes. So just as an FYI.
Okay. All right.
But
Well,
I'm glad that you are here, and I'm glad that you have your pulse on everything and all these people that you bring into this family, and I love it. And are you taking it? Oh, maybe we should both do it. Okay.
yeah. It's on.
And you brought in somebody that I think everyone is going to be excited to hear, and a great part of the team here. Who is that?
Cool. Don Aarons. I'm going to bring Don. Hello, Don. How are
Good morning.
you?
Doing well.
Don is up in the up near Canada in the very north western part of the United States, and he keeps on on top, just like you and John and Eddie and Tammy and so many other people. I joke all the time because I actually don't follow the news all that much. I just wait for it to either come in my email or from you guys, or I listen to the Lamb Network and get my news from you guys, because everything else is so hard to filter, if you know what I'm saying. And of course, you guys know what I'm saying. And Don is one of those people that sends me already filtered news from time to time. And when he sent me the last one a couple of weeks ago, I thought, well, this is interesting. I've been, Don, last time we actually saw each other, I think was 2010 at Sukkot in Chandler. And we just tried to stay in touch, as I do so many different people. It's interesting. Sandy, you know, my whole ministry is networking. That's all I do. And when I meet people, I get contacts, and I find out who people are and what they have to offer, and how can I put them with somebody else and network like-minded people. And that's how the Lamb Network came together. And Don is one of those people. And I have been after him for over 10 years now well, it wouldn't have been over 10 years ago, because
2011
into our 9th year of Lamb Radio. But for 9 years now, I've been after Don to get on here and do a show or something, and he tries to stay off the radar as much as possible. But I think he's lightening up a little bit, and we're going to get him in from time to time. He can't do it regularly, but Don, we're extremely happy to have you on. And may I parenthetically say, finally.
Thank you. I'm very humbled and blessed to be here. My background is that I don't have a congregational ministry, but occasionally I get the opportunity to teach. And my focus has always been on the end days. I'm not really a person who watches the news. I haven't been connected to network television since 2007 or 8. But it's amazing how the Ruach HaKodesh will place things in my lap. I mean, whether it's YouTube or whatever it might be. And when I go out to try to find things, like through Google alerts, and I'll have a subject matter that I'm interested in, it doesn't come. But when when the things fall into place. And so this subject came up. In January, I mentioned to my wife that I feel the move of the Spirit to learn how to farm this year, and to seriously take this into account. And so we're watching different channels on the different methods of farming strategies and what have you. And over the course of this, we came about a subject called the Grand Solar Minimum. And I've been following space weather for a long time. And there's a particular YouTube channel called suspicious observer that I watch quite a lot. And there's a normal heartbeat cycle to the sun that has solar maximums and solar minimums, and it's an 11-year cycle. So if you think of it like an EKG, it's the heartbeat of the sun. It goes through this normal cycle every 11 years. But what has been anticipated, and I've been watching this for almost 7 years now, that there's this phenomena called a grand solar minimum. It's a cycle in the sun that is about 340 years approximately. There's no set year to it. And what it is it's a continuous low solar output for an extended period of time of, say, 30 to 70 years. And so if we take the conservative approach that the next grand solar minimum is 30 years, if it were to start now, it would be 2053 or 2052 that it would come to an end. So essentially the rest of our lives. I will be in my 90s by that time. And so that's caught my eye. But as I've started watching this, 2 years ago, the farmers were starting to see the pattern. And the official, it started by nasa.gov, was April 2020. So you can Google a lot of this information, and it's out there. And the news is suppressing the information. Now, in Revelation 18, it says that the merchants, in Revelation 18, the word merchant is mentioned in 3 different verses. And in Revelation 18:11, it says the merchants of the world, which are the globalists, because they're talking about in the other verses, moving cargo from all over the world, weep and mourn over her, Babylon the Great, because no one buys their merchandise anymore. So this isn't a shortage of merchandise. This is merchandise is available, but they can't afford it. They're spending their money where? Well, we know, and I'm not saying that we're in the tribulation now, so let's not confuse that. We're in the times of sorrows. And so, but in Revelation 6, it talks about the third seal, and it mentions a quart of wheat for a denarius, and a denarius is synonymous with a day's wages, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. So when we get to that time period, food is going to be extremely costly, which means there's a food shortage. And so the reason why the merchants can't sell other products is because the rest of the world can only afford to buy the food for themselves. They can't even afford their other expenses or their family for that matter. So this is the times of sorrow. And when COVID first came out, and it was kind of funny on YouTube, I was watching a gentleman teach me about different health issues because I'm challenged by a few health issues. He all of a sudden went full time on COVID back in December, which is way ahead of the curve of everybody. And all of a sudden I'm getting all this information about it. And so I started researching it in scriptures, and pestilence, which is like a pandemic, is always followed by famine and sword. And that pattern throughout scripture is very prominent. If you look for that in your search engines, you can find that out. We are now in a pattern that is similar to what happened during the Chinese dynasties. Now, the last time a grand solar minimum occurred was the Dalton Minimum. And that was during the Revolutionary War. So if you look at the pictures of like Washington, there's a lot of snow and what have you, a lot of excessive snow. That was about at that time. But our country is not old enough to have documented going through these grand solar minimums. But After that period, our country has only experienced a modern maximum, which is stable crop growth and being able to grow more and more food for the planet. So the last time, throughout history, the last 6,000 years, the population has hovered on average or just slightly below or around a billion people. It wasn't until the 1850s with the advent of petroleum and, of course, the grand solar maximum to grow food has the Earth's population gone to 7 billion. So this has never been seen with a population this large. And the grand solar minimum represents a risk of partial existential threat with that kind of population level. The extended reduction in solar activity affects Earth's weather. It will increase and heighten volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and most importantly, the growing seasons are shorter. And sometimes you can't even plant. There was back in the 1630, there was a summer without, it was a year without a summer. And throughout Europe, they couldn't grow food. Now, this is not, some people will call it, and these are marketing terms, a mini ice age. But rather than it being an ice age, it's the inability or extreme difficulty to grow crops in north of the 45th parallel and severely impair producing reliable crops south of that 45th parallel. This produces consecutive multi-decade crop failures. And that's what has happened in the past. It's only a 2-degree change in the Earth's average temperature, but it causes crop disruptions through late spring and early summer, frost and snow. And in the summer, you have hail and derecho. And then in the fall, you have, again, early crop failures. It is also some areas will get so much rain, they can't grow crops. You've seen that this year in India, Brazil, and China. In other areas, won't have any rain. In fact, even Germany would fall in that category. But Ireland was in a drought this year and couldn't grow a lot of their crops. This year we had the earliest snowfall in the Midwest. It tied the record for the earliest snowfall. But that earliest snowfall was only about 1 to 2 inches. This was 13 to 18 inches during a time when we had most of the farmers for the major crops had to replant 3 times this year. So with the late planting meant late harvest. And then all of a sudden you have this snow event come through and it disrupted it. We had the derecho in Iowa, 70% of the crop destroyed. Australia's winter, there's places where snow had never been recorded. And they had over 18 inches, some places 36 inches of snow in those areas that have never recorded snow. China had 2 blizzards in August, in addition to their floods. The 2 previous years had similar events, and that's why NASA.gov finally stated that we have entered a grand solar minimum, but they're downplaying it. And the way they define it is like the 11-year minimum of the normal cycle of the sun. An interesting picture that a lot of times they'll bring up is in the British Museum of London. The Thames River froze over for an extended period of time, and they had what was called the Thames Frost Fair. And this happened in the winter of 1863 through 84, and where they literally held fairs on the Thames that was completely frozen over, and that hasn't happened since. The American Revolution we mentioned happened at that time, but the best record of it all is the Chinese dynasties, and I'll come up with that in a second. But there was the Homeric minimum in 950 BC to 800 BC, the Ort minimum from 1040 to 1080, the Wolf minimum from 1280 to 1350, the Spora minimum 1450 to 1550, the Mater minimum, which was the big one, was 1645 to 1715, the Dalton minimum, and that was not a full grand solar minimum, but it was still a minimum, was 1790 to 1820. And then we've been in the modern maximum since 1914 to 2008. And since then, 2008, it's been, the solar activity has declined. And now we're entering into the modern minimum, is what they're calling it, 2020, and they expect it to at least last to 2053. Now, it's interesting to see that a lot of governmental systems are going to utilize this event to achieve agendas. I've been watching the World Economic Forum for over a decade. It's one of the favorite places for Prince Charles to speak at and Kissinger to speak at. And he's now 102 years old. And he said this year, he has a famous quote, but he reemphasized it this year, that the food supply will be utilized to control the world population to implement the reset. And if you've seen the cover of Time magazine, the current Time magazine, it's all about the reset. And I encourage everybody to go online and look at what they have to offer on that subject. The World Economic Forum intends to use the grand solar minimum to institute their changes to control the population through the food supply. And that's why UN Agenda 21, and the new one, UN Agenda 2030, have been implemented. They knew these times were coming for quite a while. And one of my favorite channels to watch, their name is on YouTube, is Adapt 2030. And because 2030 is when the more serious part of this grand solar minimum will be starting. We're transitioning into it now. And that's why you're seeing a lot of seed shortages and mason jar shortages, the lids. There's so many people that have come on board, and the shortages are because some people may blame that it's the COVID and shutting down, and that's in part, but quite a lot of this is because they know that this is coming on, because those who are into growing, whether they're market farmers or homesteaders, they're realizing the value of greenhouses as we go into this type of cycle. And August of, let me back up a little bit. April of 2020, NASA.gov said we've entered the grand solar minimum. April 15th, 2020, the USDA was structured under the Department of Homeland Security. So our food supply is now part of the military. August 2020, the Gulf Stream weakened and now turned 90 degrees off the coast of North Carolina instead of going up to Nova Scotia, which dramatically changed the climate of North Africa's desert region into the world's new breadbasket. August 2020, Secretary of Washington State Department of Agriculture was on a local news station showing his third giant warehouse that was funded by the federal government and was filled from floor to ceiling with storable food for what they believe will be an increased demand for food for the poor. And so the federal government, and he stated that the federal government is supplying funds to all 50 states and to buy this food. And that's why there's been a can shortage in a lot of the grocery stores throughout this year, is we're competing against the government for those supplies. September 14th, 2020, President Trump went to California when the wildfires were breaking out and Gavin Newsom was blaming the wildfires on global warming. And in a very nonchalant way, President Trump replied back to it, "It'll start getting cooler. You just watch." And so that was a definite telltale that this is being very seriously considered. In October 21st, after that meeting, 2020, President Trump signed into law S881, the Promoting Research and Observation of Space Weather to Improve the Forecasting of Tomorrow Act, which is also called Pro-SWIFT Act, and started the National Space Weather Program because they understand that this activity of the solar cycle that we're going into is going to impact national security, if not global security. I mentioned before about China. They're taking this more seriously than anybody because they have a long, extended history. All of the Chinese dynasties ended during past grand solar minimums. The Jin dynasty on the Oort minimum, the Yuan dynasty during the Wolf minimum, the Ming dynasty during the Maunder minimum, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Qing dynasty during the Dalton minimum. So China is very much aware of the threats to security of their form of government today, that they are sourced, and we saw how the floods, they didn't have a growing season this year. Their warehouses where they store food were flooded.
Wow.
Okay. Some of the places where they get a lot of their food from also had their challenges. I'll bring that up. But in 2013, China, in preparation for knowing the grand solar minimum is coming, China financed and started building the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Now, this is not the Three River Dam in their country. This is in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is on the northeastern corner of Africa. And by the way, that's going to be ripped apart fairly soon. I can bring that up on another subject if you want me to bring that up. But Adapt 2030 had a very good presentation a couple of weeks ago on looking at from space, looking down on this area, how this used to be a fertile growing area where they grew rice in this desert region. So something had dramatically changed, and he talks about the geography and how that changed. And you can see these marks in the land and what have you. But China built this dam on the Nile, and of course, Egypt had a big issue with this thing, and suddenly had a change of heart. Don't know what happened in the background to change that heart. But why is China building this dam, electrical grid, infrastructure, highways, and port upgrades? Because they know that's going to be the breadbasket of the world over the next few years. That's why the Gulf Stream turning in South Carolina and going to Portugal and Africa is going to change this area from being a desert to a fertile land.
Interesting.
Why would you dam up the Nile in the middle of a desert? In 2019, China financed ports, railways, airports, naval bases, as well as servers that house most of all the internet for Somalia, Yemen, and Ethiopia. In 2019, China extended the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, in South America and invested in mega infrastructure projects, including ports, railways, and highways. China has become the #1 trade partner for all South America countries, particularly Argentina and Uruguay, which is the grain belt for South America, and Brazil for the livestock. So China is going to depend heavily on these socialist countries for their grains. So China is taking this very seriously in investing billions of dollars into these areas because they won't be able to grow their food sufficiently enough to stabilize their population and maintain their control. So the goal here is how to achieve food independence as we're in the time of the times of sorrow. This is not about the tribulation and all the promises that we have during that time and preparing for the tribulation. This is not that. This is just enduring during the times of sorrow. And so we are going into this phase now where we're going to see, we saw the derecho, 70% of Iowa's crop was destroyed. And by the way, last year was a crop failure, but they didn't report it. They called it a bumper crop. And just 3 weeks ago, the USDA downgraded the production by 60%. And they did that because they didn't want food prices to rise. And so now they course correct that after the markets don't get impacted. And you're going to continue to see that type of cycle. So what needs to happen is we need to come together as a community to start growing our own food, because some crops take about 120 days, others can be as short as 80 days. But if you're planting, you're starting your crops early with grow lights and making seedlings for your, while it's still too cold outside, and growing your food indoors, and then transitioning and transplanting your plants once the frost appears to be ending, is a way to get the growing season to extend it. But what happens if that growing season all of a sudden becomes less than 90 days? It's going to be hard to get a crop in from some of our major crops. The winter squashes are critical to winter survival. The potatoes and sweet potatoes, all of these crops are 115, 120 days. And, so this is where I don't believe the so-called prepping model works unless you're buying a freeze dryer, and which has about a 30-year shelf life. And by the way, if you're going to go hiking, freeze-dried food is wonderful. It's, you're taking all the water weight out. So if you're going to be mobile, freeze-dried is the way to go. But a 30-year shelf life is almost long enough if this is as minimum as they think it might be. But one of the best ways to go about it, if the high-end growers are using what is called passive solar greenhouses. And passive solar greenhouses is where they pipe air into the ground. When you make the greenhouse, you're putting a 4 to 6 foot foam barrier around the greenhouse, separating it from the ground that is outside to the ground inside. And you're pumping the hot air from the top of the greenhouse into the ground on 2 different levels, and then pumping it back out. So you're sucking the hot air on the top and blowing the hot air and the cooler air on the bottom. So in the summer, it cools the greenhouse, and then you reverse the cycle where you take the cold air out and you throw the warm air in, reversing the fans, and that keeps your greenhouse warmer during the winter without. And so all you're doing is spending money on the fan without any heaters. In a passive solar greenhouse, it's a east to west length greenhouse. The back side of the greenhouse is facing north. That's a brick wall, a highly insulated brick wall. And the southern side is all glass coming up to 3/4 of the way around. And that lets the full sunlight in as the sun comes around this way. And one of the better brands out there is called Sears. It's it's spelled CERES. And if you go to their YouTube and see their greenhouses, they're actually one of the best high-end ones. But the reason why I mentioned them as opposed to a more economic model like a hoop house, a high-arched hoop house with the plastic that is wrapped over it, is because hail will tear those things apart, hurricanes will tear apart. There's a number of weather events that could hinder those things from working, especially in northern climates. And So these are the types of things that we can use to continue to grow without the weather affecting it. And you actually can get more food supply out of your greenhouses. And I've seen this firsthand with a YouTube channel called Deep South Homestead. And today's episode was just that. And you can grow triple the amount of crops year round. Banana, citrus in Montana, if you want. They're not Montana, but you get the picture of growing and chaining food independence from this. It doesn't mean that you're eliminating outside growing, or you can have hoop houses for certain things and these more high-end greenhouses for others. But this is a way to shield yourself from the future food inflation that we're going to be seeing. So that's the essence of what I had to share today with you. Do you have any questions, or you're muted, Mark?
I know we do this all the time. We mute and forget to unmute. Yeah, wow. A lot to it, right, Sandy? A lot.
Well,
what do you say?
There's a lot there. But I know you're talking about the hoop houses, and then you're talking about this other passive solar greenhouse. What do you do if you have the only land you have is about 30 by 40? I mean, that's
just it. Is when I preface that with we're going to have to come together as a community. Let's say okay, I've got money and I just won the lottery and I'm going to Montana or to wherever you think is safe, right? And you go buy 100 acres in the middle of the woods and nobody can see you. Great. But what happens or you go anywhere else? You can't. How are you when the rest of the people don't have food? How are you going to protect that crop from other people?
Right.
How are you going to share that with the right people? Because you want to be able to have excess capacity to help. That's where community comes in. This is not I'm going to have my own homestead. This is a call that people are going to have to come together and combine resources. And I'm very serious about that.
I might suggest, Sandy, that you might have to tear the pool down.
Yeah. Well,
you know why John has that. We didn't have one. He gathered that so it would be a water source.
Yeah,
That's
I know.
the reason he has that. But there's even with that, because I grew, I was very blessed in a 8 by 40 piece a plot. I grew so much food this year. I grew everything vertically.
Nice.
I had an amazing harvest of all of it. And then I had a few other things here and there, but basically I used just a little bit of land and I grew everything up, and that's great. But as you said, it's got to be bigger. But like our community, the community that we're in right now, our congregational family, I can tell you that nobody has resources like that.
Yeah, I realize that. What's going to happen is, like, I'm just now concluding my time on the board of the home association I belong to. And I've tried to I go, look, I know I'm going to sound like this fearmonger type, and I'm not. And I didn't have the opportunity to give them as much of a detail. I can talk about this for 6 hours. This was just the brief elevator pitch. But I tried to encourage them. You're going to have to change your rules on being able to grow in the front yard to be able to I didn't even go this far to say it, but put tracks on your roof and put grow bags on your roof.
Put grow bag. What was the first part you said on your roof?
Putting tracks, something so the things don't slide, right?
Okay.
If you have a pitch, and put grow bags up there so that you can utilize every square inch. I sifted out my whole backyard. My backyard, picture hard clay and the kind of rock they use on railroad tracks. and it just that kind of thickness. And I literally was hand picking and digging 18 inches, a 45 by 35 plot in my backyard, and sifting every bit of it, and then throwing, getting better soil and brought it into several dump trucks full into there. And we were using drip tape and fertilizer injection. And I'm a big organic guy, but I'm learning the value of, I don't like pesticides and things like that, but I'm learning the value of certain times and reasons for using non-organic fertilizers and putting it through the drip tape, and to be able to have higher yields and ensuring those yields. And one of the places I learned that from was a YouTube channel and company called Haas Tools. And they are focused on the backyard farmer or small homesteader on how to make it easy to ensure crop growth. And so they have the old-fashioned single wheel and double wheel hose that you push yourself, and using those to put the drip tape in, and they have the water infusion, and be able to hill up on top of your potatoes and weed between the rows with those things. Because I'm not a big fan of row covers because of putting microplastics into your food. But I've also learned the value of you're going to have to do things that are outside of your wheelhouse. And so I've been learning these different things. And we have we're very hill area here. So we have where the drop off is, we had a little cement drop off. And I was telling my wife, we could put 50 grow bags all on that edge there. But it's going to take a shift with the home associations. And it's going to take because you can't grow enough with my backyard. So I've already had the dilemma of, we just moved here 2 years ago, and we're already faced with the dilemma. We either need to sell our house and downsize the nice house for a bigger property of some
tiny
sort.
House.
And
tiny house.
Yeah, just to be able to afford the property. And so what we're looking for now is a hill full of timber that you can harvest as logs, but take that rain that comes down that hill and create a swale that feeds into a cistern to harvest the water, or create lakes, and stock those lakes so you can use that for aquaponics.
See, that's sort of the thing we would have to do, because I live in an area where there's no trees and no hills. So in fact, what you said, I found it interesting when you said put things on the roof, and I was thinking about that for a minute. But one of the things that brought me great crop production this year, because I live in Amarillo, Texas, is that I had shade cloth up over everything because of our sun here. So putting things on roof, you would be open, it would fry.
Yeah. There's a number of things that I don't know how to do it. Part of a greenhouse is being able to, because I've always said, why don't we, before this all started, I said, a great invention, I could probably make a good amount of money off this if I were to start a business, is to put a retractable shade cloth over your entire house. And thereby reducing your air conditioning costs to your house. And wouldn't be too hard to do.
That's so fascinating, because I'm telling you the difference in the way it feels under a shade cloth, and shade cloths have UV protection in them as well. Mm-hmm. It's huge. And this was my very first year for doing it. I didn't have sunburn. All my stuff used to have, you could see some sunburn, and there wasn't great growth. It was one of the factors that changed everything this year was shade cloth. But that concept of putting it over your house, that's
massive, though. That is a massive project.
It is.
And I would have to say would be quite expensive, it would seem to me like, and the having to keep track of the winds and storms, that type of thing, to keep it safe. Once you spend a lot of money on it, it would have to be retractable. It would have to be something that
automated.
Automated. That's a massive, expensive project.
Well, there are weather alert radios.
Sure.
And with those weather alert radios, you can have that same alert trigger a retraction. So there are ways of doing that, but you don't always get a weather alert for a hailstorm. And we've seen in the news, extremely large hailstones, or at least they claim they are in the news.
Pictures, they're double hands.
Yeah, bigger than footballs. And this year, and so that's going to be a more common thing if those were true. I don't know if they were true, so I'm a skeptic when I see things like that. But until I see it, but the reason why I'm coming out is I have my favorite people who have updates on prophecies and the Bible and what's going on and where we're at. A interesting one that probably y'all have never seen is a YouTube channel called Behold Israel, and the gentleman lives in Israel, and so he comes with a very in-depth perspective of what's going on in the Middle East that is second to none. And he had talked about what was going on with Turkey, and and Turkey has been involved in a number of different things as of late. And no sooner than that these things were going on that Turkey gets a massive earthquake, which was interesting to me. But he, about 3 weeks ago, was talking about, I can't remember the names of those two countries to the north, but they're squabbling right now. And this has the United States, Russia, China, Iran, and Turkey all involved in this little skirmish. And he seemed to think that this could be a linchpin, kind of like what we saw with World War I's and how World War I started right here in this little region. And but he's constantly coming up, and so his channel is Behold Israel. But he is a person who is your typical evangelical pre-trib rapture guy. So the moment he starts talking about those things, okay, turn off the the presentation.
Sure.
But his perspective is just wonderful, and it comes out every Thursday or Friday on that. And his name is Amir. And but I watch these things, and the other people who we all know provide updates, and nobody's talking about this grand solar minimum and getting the brethren to start paying attention to it, because it's hard enough to learn how to grow, and the different ways to grow. Because I don't believe one way is good for all things and all plants. But you've got the square foot gardening method, the back to Eden farming method, the no-till farming method, the little till farming method, on and on and on. And so there's lots of ways to go about it, and you can be overwhelmed. But whatever works, but you got to learn how to do it. For us, we had a complete tomato failure with our crops this year. We were very successful with potatoes, very successful with winter squash, but tomatoes were 100% failure. We had blight. And so we learned that you can't grow tomatoes unless you're in a greenhouse up here. And I had a few people confirm with me, yeah, that's right. So there are going to be different things in your area that's going to be a challenge too. I mentioned Deep South Homestead and their presentation today. They have two high arch greenhouses, and they get that from Grower Solutions. And they went through a hurricane and it survived. We were all praying for them. They had 3 hurricanes come. They were in Mississippi, and so they had the 3 different hurricanes come within their area, but one that was a direct hit, and it survived. And I was impressed that it did that. But to see their crop yields, it takes fewer plants and you're getting year-round crop yields in those greenhouses, and with the same plants, not replanting. They have pepper plants that are just crop after crop after crop, and they're amazed because they're old and a little older than me, and so they realize they can't be doing what they've been doing on their 5 acres that they have been doing. And so they completely changed their game plan. They installed 2 ponds this year, and the last year and a half, 2 greenhouses, and they have a small third one. And they're just going, they have an off-grid home and an on-grid home. And they're doing a number of different things to make it easier to grow food. But, you know, the only thing they don't have is the freeze dryer, but they do a lot of canning and dehydrating and stuff like that. I don't like the dehydrating, but that's just my preference. But all these things you got to learn, and it's hard enough to do it during good times. What are you going to do when the harder times come?
Right.
So this is not just something where like, hey, we all got to do this and come together as a community. It's, you know, I homeschool my son, and I gave up my career a few years ago. And so we've been living off of a 1 income. And I have the time to learn this stuff and apply it. I can't imagine someone who's full-time, both parents are full-time workers, and trying to even wrap your hands around this.
Right.
So there needs to be somebody who can really bring it together. And like I said, the Haas Tools website or Gardner Scott YouTube channel are 2 wonderful resources to learn Gardening 101. Gardner Scott, unfortunately, focuses more on raised beds, and that's the per square foot gardening method. But there are other areas. I've been focusing more on permaculture, and so I've been gravitating more towards those guys for understanding how to have the highest yields in the most productive and consistent way to grow food. And the whole focus is on the soil. And that's what I did this year. Is I told my wife, we're not going to get a full crop in, and if we don't get anything in, that's all right. But this year is about the infrastructure of how to get that. So I focused entirely on the soil and the drip tape, not drip hoses or drip lines. These are drip tapes where you have emitters every foot down a row, and then you have the infusion into the drip tape of whatever fertilizers you need. You know, this year I learned that nitrogen gets the seed, gets the green growth going, but the phosphorus helps the flowers, and the potassium helps the fruit. And so there's different. You don't really need PNK in the beginning. You need more nitrogen in the beginning, more potassium or phosphorus when it's flowering, and the potassium when it's when you got the fruit. And so there's these little things that you learn on bringing this all together. And then when do you use small hoop rows and things of that nature? What's an easy weeder? And how do you eliminate bugs without using insecticides? Because I will not use insecticides. And, you know, so all of that takes time.
Yeah, you lost me long time ago because I don't understand most of this. My wife will, and I'm sure
Right.
Sandy does. But
I do. Well, one of the things I wanted to say is that I focused on I focused on soil this year as well. I did a lot more of that, and I changed my mix on how I infuse things or what I put into my soil. And it does make a huge difference. And I don't have a lot of knowledge on drip tape and all that. I need that. I need all of that because right now I just do it by hand. Mm-hmm. So I need that. But you're right. There's so much to learn, and I spend I have so little time. But even that, I'll be up at 3:00 in the morning trying to learn some things on gardening so that I can better what I'm doing, because it takes time. And I used the channel Callie Kim, and now that is little small time stuff. But I've learned a lot on that just for my small time garden.
There's Sandy's garden right there for you.
Yeah. Nice.
Well, I mean, she did. I thought she did a great job, but
I think
that
so.
was a lot of the things.
That's when it was declining, Mark, because that's October. So
that was during Sukkot. That's John in there harvesting for Sandy while she's at Sukkot. But
picture of that.
But you can see, I mean, it's just like only, I think even less than a third of that backyard is for her plants. The other 2/3 is for a pool. And I get it, but I think you can store a lot less water, John, and
for our congregation. So, but
yeah, I get it. Still.
But I think that's where when Don, you talked about front yard, I have been thinking about turning things into my front yard. And also, here's something we need to do. We need to be growing trees that produce food too. And I've been very convicted. Every year I'm going to invest in some fruit trees, and I don't. I'm like, well, I'm going to have to stick them in my front yard. But I think we do have to start growing in our front yard. It is the biggest space that's unused.
Right, whether it's medicinal herbs that you put out there or fruit trees. And let me give you a little tip on that. One of the things I learned, if you're going to start a new homestead, the first thing you plant are fruit trees. And if you're going to start fruit trees, the best way to buy them is online. You buy the roots. You don't buy a tree, you buy the root, and you plant the root, and it will actually be bigger than any tree that you buy after the first year. For some reason, when you replant a root, the growth rate is almost 3 times that of a normal tree. And so, like I mentioned, Growers Solutions before, they have the greenhouse, but they also sell those type of fruits. And there's a number of others out there. But right now, if you go to All American Canner, the steam canners, you won't get, if you place an order today, it'll give you a note that you will not likely get the canner until April or May.
You need to order now.
And if I run into people, I tell them that shopgoodwill.com, you can find them there sometimes.
Can you type that into the chat down there at the bottom of your chat there to the right of your screen?
Yeah.
There you go. Sandy, what do you think? Is it time for Dawn to do a gardening show?
Well, I think I honestly, I've even this knowledge, when people have this knowledge, we used to be generationally there and we were connected to the land. So that kind of information was passed down and you had that. Now we lack things because we're city people and we think the garden is the grocery store. Well, that grocery store is not going to always be available. And we have got to learn these things. And just as Dawn said, there's so much out there to learn. It's going to take a lot of people spreading their wisdom in many different methods, because this is crucial, in my opinion. This is why, an integral, this is why right now, pepper plants, if you didn't know this, are perennial. I massacred my beautiful, oh my goodness, 6-foot pepper plants that were every one of them. I have like 15, and I brought them, I brought them down to the Y and took the leaves off, and I brought them in, and now so they get six hours of sun a day, but I brought them inside. I pulled every one of my herbs from my garden. We have got to find, and I'm about ready to start growing other things, starting with grow lights in the house. And I've moved things around in the little house that I have so that I can grow food and get food ready to grow as much as I can. And not only here to hand it out to people in the congregation, because I am with him. This is so very, very important. And does he need to spread his knowledge? Absolutely. Do we need to spread our knowledge? Absolutely. Maybe we need to make it a thing on Chapter. I don't know.
A segment. Yeah, I thought about that too. I was thinking the same thing. We'll talk about this, Don.
Okay. Just real quick, I just put into the chat here,
Okay.
azure.com, azure.com. That's a good place to buy food in bulk for less expensive than you can buy at Amazon or Costco or places like that. And a lot of times when you buy, let's say, black beans, and my favorite bean is Jacob bean, the best chili bean there is that. It's hard to find those things. And so at Azure, you can buy those. What I do is I buy Mylar 5-gallon bags on Amazon with oxygen tablets, 2000 cc oxygen tablets. And I buy like a Home Depot, either a food grade 5-gallon bucket or just a Home Depot normal $3 bucket. Because you're going to have this in Mylar bags, so it doesn't matter if it's food grade or not. But you can buy your beans and rice and lentils in bulk, put them into these Mylar bags with the oxygen tablets, and that'll give them a good 20-year shelf life. Wow. And so instead of going to these expensive places to buy these buckets of freeze-dried food, you look at some of these places for a 3-month supply for one person of this freeze-dried food is $830. And to go to harvestright.com and buy their freeze dryer, they have the small, medium, and large. You can be making your freeze-dried food. And when you're talking freeze-dried food, we're saying you can cook a meal, put it in a tray, and freeze dry it, and then you can rehydrate it later, and that has a 30-year shelf life. And if you put that into one of these Mylar bags with an oxygen tablet, even further. And don't forget that freeze-dried food is super light. So let's talk about, if you have to be mobile for whatever reason, whether there's a skirmish war or you need, I've even thought about going places where I bury food. And should the time come where thieves came and stole my supply, I can go somewhere and dig it up and know it's still there. There's the gamma lids that you put on to the 5-gallon buckets, and I recommend those as well. What we've done in our food storage is black beans are black lids, and yellow lids are jasmine rice, and things like that. You just color coordinate the product with the color of the lid, and that way you can quickly identify what you need to pull. And if you don't have the backyard space, freeze dryers are the best ways to go. Canning is okay. You can even if you don't have enough to farm, you can still buy fresh produce from a local farm and can it yourself or freeze dry it yourself. Those are great investments. And so learning how to can and I strongly recommend buying a freeze dryer. They're expensive, but that's one of the best things. If you can't grow your food, that's your option. Good. And so that's where I go. When I first came aware of my health issues in 2011, I had to relearn nutrition and eating. And so I had to go on what is called a whole food plant-based diet. And my body lost its ability to digest animal products. And when I went from 17 pharmaceuticals, and this is another subject matter that I've become a pretty good knowledgeable person in, is reversing chronic disease through change of diet. And I'm not what you would call a vegan who's an animal rights activist, not even the little slightest. But I have learned that when you eliminate vegetable oils and animal foods, you can reverse. I had chronic high cholesterol, triglycerides, high blood pressure, peripheral artery disease, liver cancer, pancreatic cancer, and the list goes on. And I've reversed all of it except for blood clots and blood pressure. And I had it under control, the blood pressure, but this past year it came back. But
You said what did you eliminate? You have eliminated vegetable oil and what? Meats?
all animal products.
All
So
animal
whether so, and it's just because you produce less. I mean, during the Vietnam War, they did a number of. This was in the documentary Forks Over Knives, which is easy to watch for free. And during the Vietnam War, they analyzed the soldiers who died, and they already had atherosclerosis at 18 years of age. And but there's ways of reversing atherosclerosis to where you get your vitality back. You don't have the blood pressure issues anymore. But if you were to, once you reverse it, if you were to start consuming that again, it quickly comes back. So there is a balance to all this. But the thing here is I'm not big on supplements. I'm not big on, it has its place, but I'm not big on it. And I'm not big on pharmaceuticals at all. And I went from 17 pharmaceuticals down to 1, making those changes. And so the people who are animal rights activists will call themselves vegan, but the people who are health and conscious, and they're called whole food plant-based. And when you, with the COVID, you're supposed to take zinc and vitamin C. Vitamin C is mostly synthetic, but Arceola, I think that's how you pronounce it, cherry, which is out of the Caribbean, can't be exported because it doesn't have a shelf life at all. So, but when you freeze dry the powder and you take Arceola cherry, that's the highest concentration of vitamin C you can consume in its natural form. And so, I've learned what, if you can do the whole, there's a book called Whole by Colin Campbell that really teaches you this. And he also wrote the China study, and where China had regional health issues and what they were eating in those regions. And it's just time over time, it proves that these things can be changed. When Caldwell Esselstyn talked about in Forks Over Knives, that when Germany came into the Scandinavia, they took all the livestock. And so those people just lived off of potatoes. And the death because of heart attacks went way low because they didn't have access to, even though they were in a stressful situation, the number of people that died from heart attacks in those regions just dropped off the charts because they were no longer consuming animal products. And as soon as the cessation ended, back came the heart attacks, and the rates went back up to where they went. And but so there's a lot of different things you can see from this. But I've learned a number of things off of what falls into my lap because of these things, and this is just one of them. You get led by the Holy Spirit to start growing, and then all of a sudden, oh, this is coming up. Oh, people need to start talking about this, and so that's why we're here today. More than happy to come anytime you like to talk about any of these areas. I've done a number. That's what my focus has been while I'm raising my son. And, it takes time to learn these things. And if we can shorten them, great. If you want to do just a show on what the experts claim are the 15 to 20 best books on learning how to grow your own food, I can do that. One of the things I put in here was a YouTube channel called Urban Farmer. And for people who have small backyards, he's the type of person you want to gravitate to. He approaches it as a market farmer. A market farmer is a small-scale farmer that turns crops constantly and sells them at the local farmer's market. So you have to have a high yield focus. And what they do is they just find a piece of property that they can lease. And then you got a group of people who lease a property in an urban area fence it off and start growing. And there's countless stories of that where people don't have the backyard to facilitate that. And if you gravitate to some of his experience, you can learn how to grow awful quick and be productive.
Right. Well, all I can say is, to me, this kind of show is, I love to listen to this kind of stuff because I learned so much, and it is knowledge that we need to be pursuing. And as I said earlier, our society had this before, but we've all gone into the cities and lost the wisdom of old. And it's hard to search it out and find it. And I appreciate the work that you've done, because you can come on a show like this, and then your hours upon hours and hours and hours of study, you can quickly sift through that and give us the high points where we can take that and then study on our own, but also use that information, because not everybody has that. You know, we want it. I know I need 20 more hours in each day. That's what that's not going to happen. So no. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this kind of show. And it is right in line with what, you know, I want to hear. My husband's actually talked about the Grand Solar Minimum on this show, I bet it was probably on our show. I don't remember it was on one of the shows, but it was just a short touch. And you came into it and you explained it really, really well, so that we can see the background of what's happening, so that we can start gearing our lives, understanding the signs of the times, just as the sons of Issachar.
Have you covered the reset at all in some of your shows? He has talked about the global reset, but not in detail. Like what you did today was in so much detail. I understood it more, because sometimes he comes because he has all this knowledge, because he studies out stuff like this, like you do. And I'm like, roll my eyes. But the way you presented it today, I got it. It's like, oh, that's why John's been telling me this is happening. Yeah, they're intertwined. The reset is the beast system, and it's just relabeled from the world order. Yeah. And so what they've been planning on for all these decades has been directed toward this time when they knew the Grand Solar Minimum was happening. And just, so this backdrop is fascinating to see it all come together now. And so if you want to cover a reset, if you want to cover the gardening, if you want to cover the Grand Solar Minimum in more detail, I'm not the expert. I try to refer you to the channels that I watch and subscribe to. And I'm not sure if you want me to promote other channels outside of this channel, but
it's perfectly fine to do that. You can tell us we're actually out of time. We've got to go. Sure. You can do as much of that as you want. But my deal is that if we did have even a specific show, and I think you can see by the chat in the chat room that a show like what we just did right here, but on a regular basis, would be a highly desired show. I mean, you can just tell by the people in the chat and Sandi and that type of thing. And if we did put something together like that, then you'd have the time to, if you were to do it, say weekly, then you'd have the time to research just for that show and the topic you want to do just for that show. It wouldn't have to be like just coming on here and covering the gamut of it. You'd have that. So we'll talk about it. Sure. You and I get together sometime here in the next week and we'll talk about it. And like Sandi said, we also do another show on Thursday mornings, exactly the same time frame. And I would say, Sandi even mentioned possibly making a video series out of having you on from time to time, maybe even twice a month or something like that, to come on and add to what we do on there, because that's really it's a discussion show. First of all, I really like what we've done here, But in the future, then when we do other things,
Mhm.
then we can open it up to more of a discussion and have the people from the chat. They had several questions and comments and stuff too, and we can go forever on this. I think it's a wide open. It's wide open to what we can do, and it's very timely for right now. As a matter of fact, I have a page of notes that we never got to. Really, I mean, Sandi understands because her and John talk about this stuff. I don't really understand it that much as when I'm listening to you. I've got 13 different notes here to ask you questions we never even got to. So I would love to go on, but we'll schedule it. We'll get it.
Well, I can't wait till you're on this show again. Sometimes it's okay to push back what you think you want to do for something like this to happen. So sure. I am so glad that you were here today, and I can't wait to engage more in this conversation. So
thank you, Sandi. Thank you, Mark.
Appreciate it. Very good. All right.
Well, everybody, you heard it here. You need to like this show right now. You need to share it on your social media. And you need to pay attention because this message was for you and for me and for anybody who could hear. And we need to heed and take note. And we need to change the way we think we need to live. And stop being acting like big fat happy cats or whatever you want to say, and start contributing. You can't depend on the days at hand. You can't depend on somebody else to take care of you. I mean, yes, Yahweh's going to take care of you, but this thing will always be here. Things may not always be the way you think they are. And that's why you need to share this show. So like it, share it. And
as we've seen this year, 2020, things are not going to stay the same. They're going to continuously change radically.
Well, Babylon the Great is confusion. I thought we see out there is perpetual confusion.
You're right.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Right. In fact, this is a note sort of to a joke that Mark's told before on the show, because we know the great toilet paper fiasco. It's already started again, folks. Just let me.
Actually, it is. I went to seriously. I went to get our groceries yesterday, and for the first time in maybe 3 months, because we stocked back on toilet paper, and the shelves are almost empty for the first time in about 3 months. First time in 3 months, I've noticed that the toilet paper shelves are back to where they were at the beginning of the quarantine, and a lot of the different items.
Government is buying, just as Dawn said, the government is buying that stuff up. So it's not available to you.
Yep. Well, it's anyway. So watch Compass of Cram tonight. If I can get that in real quick here, we're going to talk about human capital. Sandi, we've talked about this on our show, and I've talked about it on Contemplating the Constitution, but we're going to discuss it tonight. A human capital, what is a human worth? So that should be an interesting topic.
Good show. Well, I will be teaching Torah Talk tonight, and we're discussing Ezekiel. So there you go.
Cool.
All right. Everybody, again, thank you for joining us here on the Monday edition of Let Us Reason Together. We will be here next week, and we can't wait to for you to be with us to see what Yah has for us. Anyway, until next time, we all say shalom.
Ta-ta.
Shalom.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.